Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. So obviously the last few days have been the RNC convention. A lot of people were interested to see how this would go after Donald Trump's obviously almost miraculous dodge of a bullet and how people would react, what the festivities would be like, would this impact the president to the possibly the next president. Would this change his outlook? Would he come in with a different demeanor? And how would the Republican National Committee itself go ahead and structure a day like this after everything that had happened? We'll be getting into that. We'll also be getting into NatCon 4. I attended that event last week. I actually spoke at it last week, and it was actually supposed to be what I was going to be talking about this Monday, but obviously events over the weekend changed plans. So I shuffled it down the schedule a little bit, but I still want to talk about it because I do think it's an important event. It's an interesting scenario where you have a lot of people who obviously want a change in the conservative movement. They see the necessity of a change in what is currently constituting mainstream conservatism. But there are many different factions involved. They all share a few overlapping priorities. They all know that Con Inc. is broken. They tend to have a more populist, nationalist focused message. However, there's a lot of jockeying for position, many different people trying to exert influence. I'm interested to break down some of the personalities, some of the people, some of the things I experienced there and explain what I think is going on with that movement and whether I think it could be the future of the right. But before we dive into all that, guys, let's go ahead and hear from today's sponsor. Universities today aren't just neglecting real education, they're actively undermining it, and we can't let them get away with it. America was made for an educated and engaged citizenry. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute is here to help. ISI offers programs and opportunities for conservative students across the country. ISI understands that conservatives and right of center students feel isolated on college campuses and that you're often fighting for your own reputation, dignity, and future. Through ISI, you can learn about what Russell Kirk called the permanent things, the philosophical and political teachings that shaped and made Western civilization great. ISI offers many opportunities to jumpstart your career. They have fellowships at some of the nation's top conservative publications like National Review, The American Conservative, and The College Thinker. If you're a graduate student, ISI offers funding opportunities to sponsor the next great generation of college professors. Through ISI, you can work with conservative thinkers who are making a difference. Thinkers like Chris Rufo, who currently has an ISI researcher helping him with his book. But perhaps most importantly, ISI offers college students a community of people that can help them grow. If you're a college student, ISI can help you start a student organization or a student newspaper or meet other like minded students at their various conferences and events. ISI is here to educate the next generation of great Americans. To learn more, go to isi.org. That's isi.org. All right, guys. So let's begin with the Republican National Convention. I did not watch much of day one or even, I'll be honest, most of day two. Look, if this isn't your job and you're watching all of the Republican National Convention, then I don't know, get a hobby, go for a run, you know, meet a lady. I don't know what to tell you. Find some more worthwhile pursuits. Some of this matters, of course. This is really a 3-day pep rally. A lot of people were posting about how cringe this was on Twitter. Oh, the convention is cringe. Of course, it's cringe, guys. That's what it's for. This is not high art. That's not what these things are about. This is about getting people excited. This is about raising everybody's level of attention so that they can go ahead and push out the vote, encourage people, this kind of thing. It's really not about putting on the most complex performance. So yeah, you've got a lot of people. Many people didn't think should be there. I think day one they had this Amber Rose person. I'm not super familiar with her, but she's got like the face tattoos. Apparently, she is famous for dating rappers, I guess. A lot of people did not like her being there. Didn't seem like the core audience for a lot of the GOP, but at the same time, obviously, you're doing mass politics. You don't like democracy? Great, me neither. But as long as you're doing democracy and you're doing mass politics, unfortunately, you often appeal to, I guess, these groups. These are people who are not generally going to go ahead and vote for the GOP, but might feel welcomed by somebody like her. I don't know. I don't know the wisdom of that. That this is not something that I think is just great in general, but I understand why someone like that ends up on stage, especially day one. Day two, the highlight was of course JD Vance's speech. Vance's speech drew some criticism from both the liberal and conservative spheres for people who are uncomfortable with just the basic idea that America is a nation and not an economic zone. I'm actually going to do a whole episode on that on Monday, breaking it down. So I'm not going to get in depth on that here now, but I just want to say that his speech was good. It's the kind of thing I want to hear. I'm glad that he is somebody who is behind Trump. I had said that of the people on the short list, I thought he was the best. I suggested that it was good to pick somebody like JD Vance because you want somebody that they fear. I said that before Donald Trump got shot at. And that becomes even more important after he's been shot at, because obviously, when you have opponents that are willing to use radical political violence in their efforts to eliminate someone from the political stage, having a guy like Vance, who is ideologically aligned with Trump and perhaps actually well to his right on many issues, is really critically important. A lot of people are skittish on Vance because he had one of these come to Jesus MAGA moments. I get that. I understand your selections are not perfect, but I do think that ultimately he is the right choice, and he mirrored a lot of the things in his acceptance speech that he had in his speech at the National Conservatism Convention, which, like I said, I attended, I spoke at, and I'll get more into that when I get to his speech. But very interesting. I'm not sure that JD Vance was selected before that shooting. We don't know all the inner workings of that decision. We don't know all the behind the scenes, but I've got a feeling that perhaps JD Vance was the post attempted assassination choice, not the pre that event choice. And so I think that the dynamic there is very interesting. So his speech was obviously a huge part of day two. And then last night, we got a couple of very notable speeches. We got Tucker. Tucker is great. Tucker is always great. He does a great job of weaving in a lot of very relatable anecdotes, speaking a lot about faith, speaking a lot about who we are as people. And he just did a great job of doing what he does best, which is being incredibly likable, making some funny points or some thoughtful points, but ultimately keeping things relatively um, pleasant while saying important things. He's got that gift of delivering very difficult truths with a smile, and that's something that matters a lot when you're trying to communicate what are very difficult things to people who you don't want to be terrified, don't want to be fear mongered to. A lot of people will characterize Tucker is some kind of fear monger on the left, but he really is very good at avoiding that. It's a skill that's very valuable, and not enough people actually yet recognize it as something that's very useful. Hulk Hogan was on stage. Obviously, you can tell from the picture that I have up there. Hulk Hogan was very entertaining. As somebody who's a child of the late 80s, early 90s, Hulk Hogan was an unescapable fixture of culture. I watched wrestling as every kid I knew did at that time. And so Hulk Hogan was an icon. I grew up with all of those Macho Man and the Ultimate Warrior and all those guys that you would associate with that time period. And Hulk getting up on stage and doing the shirt tear off, ripping taking off his jacket that he was wearing over the t-shirt, and then ripping off his Hulk shirt to reveal the Trump shirt. It's beautiful. It's exactly what you'd expect, but the moment is still a little bit of magic. Yeah, it's cheesy. Yeah, it's a little dumb, but it's also fantastic. So that was definitely something that drew a lot of attention. And of course, you had Trump's speech itself. Now, Trump's speech was good. There's a lot of good stuff in it, especially the early section of Trump's speech. He spoke specifically about the power of God and that he would not be here if it was not for God. He did a great job of calling for unity. It was something, a moment, you have to think about this. If Donald Trump is who the media said he was, if Donald Trump was this super scary authoritarian leader, and that was really the core of what he wanted his administration to be, he had the perfect moment to call for something radical. Right? He had the mandate of his followers. He had just survived an assassination attempt. It's very clear that the left is willing to use violence to go ahead and eliminate him. They fear him that much. If he wanted to drive his followers to the kind of fervor that the left pretends that Trump is after, he absolutely could have done that. He had the perfect moment to do that. But instead, the speech was about unity. The speech was about honoring his crowd. He spoke a lot about how the crowd was brave when the gunshots rang out, that they didn't run, they didn't stampede out of there, which is very true. It's an amazing thing. That really there is a lot of truth to that fact that everyone was captivated in that moment to see if Trump was okay. They're not running for their own lives. They're not trampling each other. That could have very easily been a disastrous moment, but instead, everyone was transfixed to see if Trump was okay. And the minute he pops up and is okay, the crowd is elated instead of, again, just running for their lives, panicking, trampling each other, hurting each other. That could have been a huge disaster. In fact, you have to think that perhaps the shooter or anyone involved in the shooting was planning on that, was hoping that that would be the result after Trump is wounded. But Trump's incredible instinct to stand up and rally his people and let them know that he's okay saves the crowd from that panic. And he gave a lot of credit to them. He also took the time to make sure and honor the volunteer fire chief Corey Carpenter and the other uh, people who were injured in that shooting. So he spent a lot of time focusing on how great his supporters are, how great the country is, how sad it is to see the loss of life, how everyone needs to come together. This was a lot of his early speech. Now, the speech was very long. It went about an hour and a half, and it started to meander and circle back on itself on a regular basis. Anyone who has seen a Trump rally, seen the way that Trump kind of just riffs on stage, there was a lot of that. Obviously, he had prepared remarks, but he was also willing to stop in the middle of those remarks and kind of go different directions, focus on different things. And so a lot of the left or people who just hate Trump, like Barry Weiss, got on and said, "Oh, well, the speech is a disaster. The speech was too long. It was too boring. It made it very clear that any Democrat could beat Trump." That's a lot of cope. That's a lot of cope. Is it the greatest speech of a convention ever? No. Could he have benefited from some brevity? Maybe. However, as my friend and often co-host, the Prudentialist, pointed out on Twitter, the length of that speech has a subtext. The subtext of the length of that speech is, here is a guy who can go forever. Here's a guy who can get shot at, stand up on stage a few days later, deliver an hour and a half speech, not just off the teleprompter, but with plenty of riffing. He brought the uniform of the firefight chief that was killed onto stage and honored it. Like, this is, he worked a whole bunch of different aspects into what he was doing. Biden, if he's distracted from a teleprompter for more than 10 seconds, just poops his pants on stage. So again, yes, was the speech long? Sure. Was it unfocused in certain areas? Yes. But does the ability to make that kind of presentation after being shot say something about the man, about his ability to bounce back from this, whether or not he's scared, whether or not he has the endurance after everything that happens? Yeah, that goes ahead and answers a lot of those questions. So I think that that probably that factored into the length of Trump's speech. So I would say, was it bad? No. Was it amazing? No. I think it struck a balance between having a strong beginning, the right kind of things that he was honoring, the right kind of things he was focusing on. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about Joe Biden. He tended to talk about what he was going to do for the country, the way that things had gone wrong, and the way he was going to set them right. I think overall it was a solid performance with the added benefit again of proving that he has the stamina necessary to go ahead and continue the presidential campaign into the rest of the election. So it'll be interesting to see what the numbers are coming out of this. It's so wild to try to understand what polling even looks like at this point. You really are in a scenario where both of the parties' candidates are hated by the media. The left is trying to drive Joe Biden out of office so badly, or at least away from the campaign so badly. And that's so very clear. They're running a article basically every hour on the hour talking about how Joe Biden's done. His family's trying to figure out how to bail him out of there. The party's trying to figure out how to replace him. He's going to announce any moment now. To the point of this, at this point, we're just the left is just lying. Like the press is just straight up lying at every moment. There's just, yeah, we heard from some ninth tier staffer that Joe Biden's completely done. He's over. They just run every one of these stories that they can, because what they're trying to do is induce Joe Biden's removal. They're trying to say, well, if we just run this often enough, eventually Joe Biden will have to back away. But Joe Biden is at this point where, one, he's too senile to really care about the pressure that the press is putting on him. And two, his family is so desperately addicted to the power, to the prestige, to the protection from things like criminal prosecution that come with Joe Biden as being president, that they're not going to leverage him out either. I mean, in a way, Hunter Biden really is in the Julius Caesar moment, right? You either win office, stay in office, or you get arrested, you get indicted. Right? I mean, he's been found guilty, but you actually have those penalties fall on you because you don't have anyone to bail you out with some kind of pardon. So you really have a scenario where there is no incentive for Biden or his family to go ahead and leave, and the public pressure is really just not useful against them because of their very singular position inside the democratic apparatus of the party and the wider kind of oligarchy that operates the United States. But the left definitely wants him out. So it's really fascinating to watch these factions of the cathedral just absolutely go to war against each other, because Democratic presidents are used to usually having the press on their side. In fact, they rely on it. Somebody like Donald Trump knows the press is going to hate him any given moment, but somebody like Joe Biden does not. In fact, they're banking on the press to even make him look like he kind of acted as the president. And now they don't have that anymore. So what happens when a Democratic president actually has to go to war with the press? I mean, sure, reporters every once in a while will get onto a president for not being progressive enough, but you're in a scenario where the entire press has declared all out war against this guy. How does that function? How does a Democratic presidency even operate when one of the main parts of the cathedral, one of the main parts of the total state, is not on their side? How does that even work? And there's a lot of irony in the fact that either the left through trying to actually kill Donald Trump, or the left through trying to remove Joe Biden, is actively trying to remove both of the party's candidates simultaneously. At the same time, the establishment is attempting to remove both of the major candidates, one which was their handpicked puppet and one which is their enemy, but neither one is acceptable, and both have to be replaced because, our sacred democracy. The only way to protect democracy is to encourage someone to wildly take shots at Donald Trump and also drive Joe Biden out of running for another term. That's how we protect democracy. Make sure that both of the candidates who have been elected in their respective primaries cannot actually run for president. That is the plan of the left going forward. The regime is so unstable, it's insane. I spend a lot of time trying to figure this stuff out, right? I do a lot of criminology here, trying to map out power structures and understand who's influencing who, what's driving what. But this is a wild moment where we really get to see these different factions of kind of the ruling total state go at each other in this moment. It's a fascinating thing to behold. All right, well, that is the RNC and some of the dynamics of post Trump's speech. I want to dive in, like I said, to the NatCon, the conference I was speaking at last week, to give you an idea of what's going on there. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit about job stacking. Hey guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, job stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right, so let's talk about the National Conservatism Convention. So NatCon has gone on for 4 years now, and it's an event that was put on by the Edmund Burke Foundation. Urim Hazoni is the guy who heads this, and it's been trying to bring together several different factions of people who are uninterested in kind of the conservative movement as it stands, but aren't really sure how to go ahead and coalesce that opposition. You could say more or less it's the Trump light folks. It's the Trump and Trump light folks who are against kind of the more entrenched uh, conservative establishment. Though, as we'll get into, there is a decent amount of crossover between the conservative establishment and NatCon. So this is not kind of the far reaches of the right. This is not, a lot of guys who are kind of seriously questioning the system, but it is people who are pushing back against, I think, kind of the Cato style neocon consensus that you have in a lot of the mainstream conservative movement. So I was there because I was speaking. What they do is they have like you have your main speakers in the main hall, and then they break people into panels. And each one of the panelists gives a speech, and then you actually have a question and answer session with the panel. And it was really great because I was on a panel with Paul Gottfried and Jeremy Carl. Obviously Paul is a huge influence in many of these spheres. So I've had him on several times. I've had Jeremy Carl on several times, but it was great to see them both in person. Honored to be able to kind of speak with them on this panel that was put together by Clifford Humphreys. And our panel was on surviving late liberalism. So I think that was a pretty good collection of people to discuss that. Though I do appreciate that Paul Gottfried immediately launched into his speech to explain why late liberalism isn't a thing, and gave everybody a scholarly refutation of the term, which was very good. Exactly what I would have expected from him. It was really nice because I got to meet a lot of people in person that you only have had, again, so many people who have been on my show, but I've never got to meet in real life. Ernst Van Zyl from Conscious Caracal from South Africa, Afroforum, was there. Known him for a long time, but of course don't get to South Africa very often. So it was fantastic to meet him in person. Got to meet Lomez, Bennett. I got to meet all kinds of people. Who else was there? Nate Hockman. A lot of people that, again, I had on the show several times, but it was great to finally meet in person. Even people who I haven't had on the show, but I've always wanted to connect with. NS Lyons. If you're not familiar with NS Lyons' work, he does a lot of great things on Substack. He also writes a lot on managerialism. So we're definitely people who are very interested in each other's work because there's a lot of overlapping influence there. We're examining the same topic to a large degree. So it was very nice to meet all those people. There's people there that I had met before, but it was nice to catch up with guys like Carl Benjamin. I also got to meet like Wade Stotts. I got to meet um, Connor from the Lotus Eaters. Again, just it was very much a right wing Twitter space, but in real life. So it was great to get together guys like William Wolf, Jack Posobiec. Again, just guys that interact with all the time on Twitter, but never got to get together. In some ways, it was almost distracting because there's so many people to meet and so many conversations to have. And I was often getting pulled out to do different meetings or different interviews and things. So I didn't actually get to sit in and listen to as many of these panels and talks as I would have liked. But still, a great. I guess that's a lot of what these things are, right? They're opportunities to network, and I did meet a lot of very interesting people who are working on incredible projects. There is, I've gone to the OGC conference, which is definitely much more of the dissident right conference, the old Glory Club conference, and now I've been to the NatCon conference, which is very much the more establishment, but not part of the establishment. Kind of the guys who are on the outside, but trying to figure out how to reform the establishment in DC. So it's an interesting contrast, the energy, the focus. But in both cases, I can tell you that I met great people, and they were all working on really important projects. And that's what's great about these so often is when you get people in a room. Often a lot of the kind of online Twitter stuff falls away, and people become friendly very quickly and get to work on important things. So these in real life meetings are critical. They're important, and they think they start a lot of projects that are very essential that need to get done. So one of the things that you start to notice when you go in there is that there are many different factions in this national conservatism banner, right? You have a lot of people from different parts of a conservative movement. They have different interests. They all, in one way or another, are trying to break away from the establishment. They have something about kind of the old fusionism version of conservatism, the William F. Buckley style conservatism that they don't like, that they want to see change. But some of them have different emphasis. Many of them are trying to feel out who could be their allies, who might be potential enemies, and you can really see that in the room. That all these different people are kind of working towards one similar goal, which is remaking what the Republican Party is now, remaking what the conservative movement is now. But many of them have very different ideas of what that should be. A few speakers that I thought were interesting that are worth highlighting. They had Saurabh Sharma. I think I'm saying that right. Sorry if I'm not. This is a guy who works at American Moment. He's doing a very important set of things with making sure that we can staff the next Trump administration, if that's a real thing, hopefully. He's a very intelligent guy. I've got to speak with him before. I think he's doing important work. He did, however, give a speech about why it's important to have an international coalition of nationalists. Now, in some ways, I agree with this, right? And that's we'll get into why this is a larger problem with the conference in a second. But in some ways, it's clear that you do need to have alliances, international alliances, even if you are wanting to be a nationalist, right? You are a superpower, you are the superpower, and that doesn't just go away because you have a changing of the guard inside the conservative movement. So you need to understand how to interact with other nationalist movements and gain what you can from them, their support, their understanding, perhaps even looking at some notes as to what you're doing. However, Sarab was going kind of beyond that, and he was saying what we really need is almost a network of non-governmental organizations, much like the left have, where these based bureaucrats can kind of hide out when they're not in power. So there's like a place for base nationalist bureaucrats to go when they're not in charge. I understand what he's saying there, but that worries me. I wrote a whole book about why I think ultimately the bureaucratic structure that exists for our country right now is actually what drives globalism. And I think we're just talking about creating based globalism, which I don't think is a great move. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have to seize control of the Leviathan before we could even think about dismantling it, if that's the right call. So I agree with him up to the point where we need to train up our own bureaucrats to seize these positions when Trump comes to power, these kind of things. I think he's doing good work there. This is not me deriding his project in general, but I do think that there's a conceptual problem with trying to create a global nationalist elite. I don't think that quite works the way he would hope. Another panel that was very interesting was a panel with John Yoo and Will Chamberlain. I've had Will on the show before. Got to meet him in person. That was nice. Will and I disagree on some things, but in general, I think he does good work. And especially coining the seize the endowments was a great job by him. His panel was on the criminalization of Donald Trump, basically the way that the Justice Department has turned the United States government and its laws into just weapons of political convenience. I think it was basically the uniform opinion of that panel that also had guys like Eastman on it that basically the right has to start doing to the left what the left is doing to the right, and that was really nice to hear because some of the guys like John Euro, they're pretty mainstream. So hearing guys like that talk a lot like more like guys in our sphere was nice. They understood, even if some of the people who are still squeamish inside the commentariat of the right don't understand this. Many of these guys who are operating in the legal spheres recognize that there has to be strength, there has to be consequences for what the left are doing with the justice system, and that means that the right has to start indicting and taking people to court and putting people in jail if necessary until the left stops what they're doing. So that was very encouraging to hear from a couple of guys who are often somewhere in the middle on some of these things. That evening, we had a speech from Josh Hawley. The Josh Hawley speech was very interesting because I spent a lot of my time because I was invited by a lot of the guys kind of in the Christian sphere. That's how I ended up on the panel in the Protestant Christian sphere. Uh, we spent a lot of time debating Christian nationalism, its merits, the use of the term, the goals. And these guys know that generally I'm on board with the goals of the movement if I'm not a huge fan of adopting the name and some of the other issues that surround it. But one of the things that I warned them out repeatedly was that the broadness of the term Christian nationalism opens it up to being co-opted very easily. And Josh Hawley kind of proved my point a little there live while we were all sitting and listening to his speech, because Hawley declared himself a Christian nationalist during the speech, which, to be fair, to be do respect to Hawley, that's an edgy thing for the press right now, right? That's a very terrifying thing for them. So coming out and saying that that was the case, that he supported this, was a big move on his part. However, Josh Hawley's Christian nationalism was not Stephen Wolf's Christian nationalism. In fact, it seemed to directly decry Stephen Wolf's Christian nationalism. Josh Hawley wanted to make it very clear that Christianity itself was the only necessary prerequisite for America to be a nation, which is kind of exactly my concern over the title. Hawley is, of course, correct that Christianity is a founding principle of the United States. It's the founding moral vision of the United States. In order to continue as a country, as a people, we will need Christianity, and it is absolutely necessary. However, Ethiopia is a Christian nation, and Armenia is a Christian nation. So Christianity itself cannot be sufficient to identify the United States as its own nation. To clarify, I'm not saying Christianity is not sufficient for you as an individual. It's absolutely critical. However, for the definition of a nation, it is not enough to by itself explain what America is. And for Hawley to kind of use it that way really confirmed a lot of my concerns about the way that that term is going to get used, the way it's going to get manipulated. And remember, Hawley's position will be staked out as the media as the most radical one. So even though Hawley was largely redefining the term and taming the term and making the term as kind of broad and taking the teeth out of the term, even though he was doing that, that will still be seen as the most radical thing, and that's what the left will push as the most radical thing. So what it does is set an anchor, create an anchor for what critical, or rather, what Christian nationalism will be. And that is a huge problem. People need to understand the power of anchoring and framing. Done many episodes on this. I tried to communicate that. I hope I was successful. But that's one of my problems with Hawley's speech. Now, Hawley did have a lot of other great stuff in his speech. He did talk about the need to avoid foreign wars. He talked about the need to care about the American middle and working class. He talked about the need to care about Christianity in the public square and that we are not a secular nation. These are all great things from him. I don't want to characterize his speech as bad all the way through. It wasn't. There was a lot of good things in there. However, I just wanted to focus on, because we're focusing on the different factions at NatCon, I wanted to point out what's going on there. So another one that I think was of note was the first panel of the day or rather one of the first get-togethers on the second day, which was a bunch of senators who individually aren't bad, guys like Mike Lee or Rick Scott, Jim DeMint. But when they got together, the purpose of this like all senatorial panel, and this is the only one that was kind of all politicians. All the other panels were like maybe you had a politician, maybe you had a host of the show, maybe you had an academic, maybe you had a preacher. This was the only one that was all politicians that I can think of. And the purpose of this panel was supposed to be the weaponization of our justice system. It was supposed to be about the attack on Donald Trump. And they spoke about that for about 10, maybe 15 minutes. They talked a little bit about Donald Trump. They talked a little bit about, for instance, abortion protesters getting locked up, which is good, but they only really talked about it for a minute or two. And then they spent the vast majority of that session talking about taxes. Oh, we got to get the tax burden down. Can you think about earmarks? Oh my gosh, we're trying. I know how to run a business. I came from the business world. Sorry, like I have Rick Scott flashbacks because he was the governor when I was a journalist, and I had to sit through that speech about 1,000 times, including in press gaggles with the governor. But it just was a kind of a joke. It really felt like, oh, this is the old Republican Party that doesn't know what time it is, doesn't understand what's going on. They managed to talk for like 10, 15 whole minutes out of over an hour about the actual topic of, our constitutional crisis that is occurring. And then they just retreated back to their favorite topic, which is like low taxes, man. We just need to adjust the tax rate. Of course, I want to cut government spending too, sure, but that's really not it's not the point right now. So another panel that I think was really important was the Albert Mohler, Doug Wilson one. This was the meeting of two guys from two very big Protestant organizations. Obviously, Doug Wilson is probably best known as a proponent of Christian nationalism, and then Mohler is a guy who is very highly placed in the Southern Baptist Convention. I believe he's in charge of the seminary, something like that. And sorry, I'm not as up on all of the inter-church politics as I should be. But these guys came together, and this was a very interesting one because while Mueller seemed to be saying, I'm not a Christian nationalist, he spent the rest of the time agreeing with Doug Wilson on basically everything. In fact, they spent a lot of time explaining that there is no secular nation, that there is never going to be such thing as a secular nation, that the government should be embracing biblical teaching and biblical truth whenever possible, that public displays of allegiance to biblical values are critical, and that Christianity is the only acceptable binding faith of the nation, which is important because again, Yoram Hazony is obviously a Jewish guy, and there's a large number of people involved in this that are going to be organizing it, and so it's really nice, of course, to have that Protestant Christians were prominently featured on this, and we're hashing out what this looks like, and Yoram was saying like, no, like obviously the future of this country has to be Christian, that's what's going to happen. So it was good to see that unity over that. The fact that it seemed like Wilson was, if anything, dragging everyone to kind of the right on this issue, if you want to call it the right, when it comes to kind of how to understand the Christian nationalist debate. But overall, I think that was very good. That was very clarifying. Well worth the time. There's another panel on separation of church and state. R. Reno was on that. I enjoyed his book, the strong Return of the Strong Gods. You can watch my video on that. We're kind of reviewing that book if you'd like. And he was on there along with Josh Hammer and a couple other guys. And same thing. There seemed to be a very much a consensus on there that separation of church and state was, as we understand it now, is a failure. That it did not work. That the version of kind of this that we have instantiated in all of our institutions today are what let the wokeness come in and control our country, and that a return to public Christianity is necessary to go ahead and return America to a better state. So again, another panel that was very much front and center, saying separation of church and state has failed. Christianity needs to be a critical part of what the conservative movement is going to be going forward. So there are multiple representations of that. Now, very interestingly, Marco Rubio was supposed to give the closing address that night. However, Trump was in Florida at that time at a rally, and we heard that Marco Rubio was not going to be able to make it to NatCon to give that speech, and Vivek Ramaswamy would be giving a speech instead. Now, of course, that's very interesting because at the time we didn't know who would be the vice presidential pick for Trump, and Marco Rubio was rumored to be on the short list. And there was a lot of speculation that the reason that Marco Rubio was not able to show up was that he was about to be announced as the vice presidential pick. I'm not sure what happened there. Now, that was the speculation. It was very clear that Rubio felt it was more important to be in Florida, perhaps at the time. But however that went down, whatever the politics were behind the scenes, Rubio did not get picked, was not announced as a vice presidential pick at that time, and Ramaswamy gave the speech. Now, Vivek's speech was interesting because, again, there's a lot to like and a lot to dislike. Vivek gave a speech that was focused on the administrative state, which I like a lot. I like that he is aware of the problems there. He understands the issues involved in managerialism, which he called out by name repeatedly. He talked about how the managerial regime cannot be reformed and can only be dismantled. We can't actually use it ourselves except in dismantling it, which I tend to agree with. So a lot to like there. A lot of things that I was glad he focused on. He took the time to focus on. However, Vivek always has a hole in his game, right? And it's this hole, unfortunately, that you would expect. He's like, we got to shut down illegal immigration. We got to shut down illegal immigration. But Vivek is very pro legal immigration. He's very much a fan of skilled immigration, specifically skilled immigration from India. Who would have guessed? And so he's got a big blind spot. He likes to talk a good game about how we need to protect American jobs. He likes to talk a good game about how we need to revivify the economy and take down the managerial state. But he does have problems with what he called protectionist nationalism, which all nationalism is going to be. But Vivek wanted to draw a line, and so what he called his version of nationalism was libertarian nationalism, which is cringe. But libertarian nationalism is fine with a large amount of skilled immigration. Surprise, surprise. And so again, this is my point. This is the same thing that we felt with Josh Hawley. We have a version of nationalism that calls itself nationalism, but seems to be very much like other versions of conservatism we've heard before, or at least in important ways. And so I think it's very interesting to see these dynamics play out. Hawley is trying to describe Christian nationalism, or he wants to stake a claim of Christian nationalism, but he also wants to redefine it. Vivek creates his own version of nationalism, libertarian nationalism, which seems to favor a pattern of immigration that could help him and many people who he cares about. And so, like I said, just interesting to see these shifting dynamics inside the movement at any given time. The next guy who gave a great speech, I thought, was Jack Posobiec. Jack is somebody who is willing to talk about the use of power, and that was very much the primary role of his speech, was to talk about why the right should be using power, why it shouldn't be scared of power, why it's important. And if he had a great line in there. If you have power without principles, you're a tyrant. If you have principles without power, you're delusional. And that's exactly the balance that I think needed to be struck, explaining to people that wielding power does not mean an abandonment of principles, but you can only have the enforcement of your principles if you're willing to use power. The only way that you can keep your principles in the primary seat, in the driver's seat, is if you are the ones wielding power. So I think that was a good speech by him. It was something that a lot of people on the right need to hear. Something that echoes very much what I have been saying. So It was great to talk to him and great to hear his speech. Got to go on his show. If you haven't seen that, you can check it out. Another one that I really enjoyed was Lomez. Lomez was there. Obviously, he is now known as Jonathan Lieberman, and he was part of a panel on the importance of arts and journalism. Amanda Milnes was supposed to be there, but she couldn't make it. But there's several other interesting speakers on that panel. He spent a lot of time talking about the importance of going ahead and promoting uh, the cultural influence of conservatism. Obviously, as somebody who has worked as a literary professor, somebody who is working as a publisher, he is somebody who's well aware with many of those necessities. I thought he did a great job. It was great to meet him in person as well. Again, somebody who I've been back and forth with on Twitter, had him on the show several times, but it was very nice to go ahead and meet him in person when I thought he had an important panel. The other really important panel, perhaps the most important panel there, which I did not get to see in person, and I have to like catch the bits online, sadly. But it had some of my favorite people, but yet again, I was pulled out of so many things. I didn't get to go to so many of these. But the alternative political structures panel, it had the other Ernst, from Afroforum. Apparently, everybody in South Africa is just Ernst. It's like Tom or something there. But he is the leader of I believe the Solidarity Movement is what it's called there. But he did a great job. It was interesting talking to both the Ernsts. Uh, you know, uh, uh, Conscious Caracol, the younger Ernst, spent a lot of time saying, we've been to these events before. People have been aware of South Africa before, but mainly it was because of how bad things were. Right? The focus was on why South Africa went south, why things have gotten as bad as they've gotten. That has been the main focus. This time, he said, when he was going around talking to people, everyone wanted to know what they were building, what they were doing, how they were creating parallel institutions, how they were able to go ahead and uh, circumvent so many of the difficulties that they've had in dealing with the government. And so I thought that was really great that they showed that mentality shift from people asking, what's going on down there? Why is it so bad? How did things get this bad? How did things fail? Instead, the shift was, here is how we are making things work. Here's how, in despite of everything, we are going to make things better. And that was, of course, the focus of that panel as well. They also had NS Lyons on there talking about parallelism. Again, this is a focus of things I've talked about. It's in my book as well. So I think these guys are on the right track. Very important. And then finally, the last speech I want to talk about at NatCon was JD Vance's speech. JD Vance, obviously, we didn't know it at the time, but he ended up being the presidential or the vice presidential nominee. But his speech was exactly what I wanted to hear from him. He talked about how America is a nation, and he said specifically, America is a people. It's not an economic zone. He said, I want to be buried in the cemetery next to my kin. This is where I come from. These are my people. This is not just a set of ideas. This is not just a piece of paper. This is a history. This is a heritage. This is a people. This is a place. This is what makes America what it is. And while we can have people come and we can have people join, at its core, if America is to be something that matters, if it's to endure going forward, we have to reconnect and understand it as a real nation and not just this economic zone for global elites to stage whatever project they're going to run next. So that was a very good thing to hear from Vance. Again, knowing, now that we can see into the future a little bit, know that ended up being selected. I do wonder when that decision actually took place. Did he already know that he had been tapped for this position? Was that something that happened after Trump went through the crucible of almost being killed? Very interesting thing to I would like to know one day, but we don't know right now. Either way, I thought he gave a good speech. Is he perfect? No. Is it everything that many people in the distant right wanted it to be? No. But is he he's a guy who's read Curtis Yarvin, knows him well, a guy who has follows guys like BAP and Raw Egg Nationalist and myself on Twitter. This is a guy who is plugged in He is aware of many of the things we're talking about. He swims in these waters, and I think that it is a good move. Of the short list of people that Trump was picking, that absolutely was going to be my pick, and I'm glad that that's what ended up happening. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and move over to the questions of the people real quick. River Weirdo says, the "I shouldn't be here, yes, you should" moment was really powerful. It got me. I'm willing to admit that. Yeah, yeah. When Trump said that, I shouldn't be here, and the crowd says, "Yes, you should be," and he says, "No, I really shouldn't. I should be dead, and it's only because of God that I'm not dead right now." Yeah, that's a real moment. It people, they get on stage, they say things. Are they sincere? You never know for sure. But I think it's hard to live through an event like that, um, and not be changed by it. And I think it's entirely possible that Trump is being sincere in at least that realization. And I certainly hope that's the case. Uh, Masculine Fenty says Trump and Co. better be ready for racist, sexist, homophobe, full court press by media establishment when Kamala is installed. Yeah, obviously, if Kamala ends up being the candidate, that's all it's going to be about. Oh, he hates the women. Oh, he hates anybody of color. Blah blah blah. That's going to be the constant refrain. But then, how's that any different? After the man got shot, they immediately went back to calling him a Nazi. So what are they going to do? Turn up their rhetoric to 11 again? That's the problem. It's kind of diminishing returns at this point. Let's see. Creepy Weirdo says anti-Biden hyperstition from the left. Yes, I didn't want to use too much neo-reactionary terminology, but yes, it's absolutely the press trying to hyperstition a Biden, uh, a Biden concession. Well, not a concession, but stepping down. I can't think of words at the moment, but they were absolutely trying to bring that into existence, and they seem to have failed up until this point. But we will see. Tiny Stupid even says, if we use reason and logic, we can talk our senile candidate into stepping down. I feel like there's a flaw in that somewhere. Yeah, it's a fair point, right? And that really is a huge problem for them. They put somebody in there who simply was incapable of caring, which worked to their advantage for a while, but now is a huge problem. They're having a difficult time influencing him. Again, his really surrounded by a group of people who are entirely dependent on him continuing to hold power. They have no incentive to leverage him out, and he is so senile he couldn't care less. And so that really puts you in a position where, are you even going to be able to get rid of this guy? Let's see. Creeper Reader says regarding CN, there's Doug Wilson. Just saying. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, I mean, Doug is great. Got to say hi to him briefly. I thought his speech was great. He's been very kind in recommending the book regularly. From all I can tell, seems like a really cool guy. Again, my problems with Christian nationalism are tactical. They are not about the people involved or in the goals. I think those are pretty much spot on. Let's see. Robert Weinsfeld says, plus one J here saying that the USA's past and future is Christian. Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that. And like I said, you are not the only one. So it's great to hear that that is going to be the truth going forward. Good to understand that people have to kind of grasp that as we decide what nationalism is going to be. It's inescapable to go ahead and talk about how it must be Christian in nature in the United States, at least. Robert says again, do you think that the DR is purity testing the Trump GOP like a bunch of libertarians? Seems like we made a lot of headway within the Trump camp. Yes, they are. And, at the same, so here's the thing. I am not one of these guys who is everything needs to be uniform all the time. It's not, oh, I think that everyone has to give unwavering support to Donald Trump at all times. I don't do that. I have lots of problems with Donald Trump. I have lots of issues. I think he falls short on in many areas. And I certainly would not demand that of him or anyone else associated with him. However, I think it is very clear that many of our guys are um, are moving up in those areas or are being noticed in those areas. I think we are influencing a lot of that. And I think that the desire to purity spiral is bad, but most of the people I see doing this are more chiding. There are certain subgroups, which I'm not going to get into, which are going hard in the paint against Donald Trump. And man, does that look bad right now, right? They were already doing this before, and after everything that happened with Trump, that's obviously something that is not working well for them. But I do think that ultimately it's worth having some pushback. I think it is worth having some pushback against uh, kind of what the Trump administration is doing, or what the future possible Trump administration is doing, what that camp is doing. And so I don't think there's any problem with criticism. I don't think there's any problem with saying, hey, we'd like to see more or something from you. The left's vanguard is constantly harrying the mainstream or harrowing the mainstream and trying to get them to change things. And so I don't think there's any problem with that so much. It's when people completely kamikaze themselves in avoidance or in criticism of Trump. I think that's a mistake. Let's see here. Life of Brian says, "How did Mark Ripito get to you?" I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember. I was trying. That's why I got distracted there. I know that name, but and I've probably spoken with this person, but now I am forgetting. Oh yes, yes, the starting strength. Yes, I made an appearance on that podcast. I just got booked when it came with the book press. But that was definitely an interesting conversation to be sure. Let's see here. Bruce Gender says, no, Knowles recently debated an atheist on if the United States was founded as a Christian nation. To me, this is something where you lose by debating like trans kids. Yeah, it's one of those things that debate is to lose it. The idea that there's any kind of debate over whether or not the founding of the United States is Christian is just insane. Yes, were certain members of the founding fathers deists, or were they unconventional Christians? Yes, that's true. But all of them were heavily, heavily influenced by the Christian faith. And outside of the core group of founding fathers, pretty much everybody else was Christian. So the idea that the United States is like some kind of deistic, almost atheistic nation is just insane. It's obviously false. Is it worth going ahead and bringing that to light? Should you do episodes on it? Should you bring that history to light? Sure, absolutely. And I do that. If you want to go back and check with guys like Ryan Turnipseed, he did a great job explaining many of the Christian founding, many of the parts of a Christian founding of our nation, and why separation of church and state doesn't work the way that a lot of people think it does. So I think that it's worth explaining that. But would I get into a formal debate with that? No, probably not. But I also just find in general debates almost useless. Don't get me wrong. I'm willing to talk to people. I've talked to plenty of people who disagree with me. I've sat down with, or I've digitally sat down with guys like Peter Boghossian and others who hold a much different worldview than me. I don't have a problem talking to people, but debating in the modern era is just a bunch of people. They're just being sophists. They're just sitting there and spewing a bunch of stuff, trying to look intelligent, trying to filibuster, trying to redefine frames. Can I do that stuff? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I can sit there and redefine frames on people. I can dunk on people. Like, obviously, I do that on Twitter. It's a skill that I have. But honestly, I just in person, I find it gross. I find it a waste of time. If I'm going to make someone look stupid, I just do it on Twitter. And then when I talk to people in real life or digitally, I want to get down to like where we could agree, where we can find common ground, how we can solve things, how we could at least clarify our differences. That's far more productive. Twitter is a space where you could never have debates, so I don't bother having debates there. But when I'm in a place where I can actually have a discussion, I'd rather have a discussion rather than try and get into some kind of formal argument with people. I don't find it very productive. Let's see. Uh, Thomas Squires says, "Do you think that the WWE approach to the convention will be effective at actually getting white working class people to vote? Because most do not." Could be, could be. Again, like I told people on Twitter, the conventions are pep rallies. That's what they're for. Someone's like, "For who?" It's like, for the guy at Walmart. That's who they're for. A lot of and I could probably write an entire book on this, but a lot of people who do political commentary or political analysis for a living need to spend more time at Walmart. And I don't say this as a man of the people. I don't say this as a populist. I wrote an entire book about elite theory. My entire channel is dedicated to explaining elite theory. I'm obviously somebody who believes that primarily elites drive culture and drive political decisions. However, there is a reciprocity. It's not just elites. There is a certain level of interaction with the average person. And one of the things that so many people miss when they're trying to do effective political messaging is they are constantly trying to sound smart when they do political messaging, which is cool. It has its uses. Sometimes I try to sound intelligent too. But also, I recognize that when you're trying to reach a large amount of people, when you're trying to go wide, and sometimes, I'm not always trying to go wide. Sometimes I go wide and then I go narrow. I try to bring in a lot of people on something, and then I try to explain a more complex thing to the people who are willing to kind of come along and join on and pay more attention. But if you are intending to go wide, then you need to understand what the average person is speaking about, what their average person is concerned about, and most importantly, what their culture is like. And you may not like that culture, but you better learn it if you want to rule people. And let's not be weird, or let's not be self-effacing. Like, well, that's what you're talking about when you're talking about politics. Is how could you get in a position to rule something? And if you want to understand how to do that, you need to speak the language of the people that you're supposed to be talking to. And the average person at Walmart, you know what? They knew who Amber Rose is. They know who Hulk Hogan is. They know who Dana White is. They know who Kid Rock is. They have no clue about your obscure policy position. They do not care. They do not care about the specifics of your trade policy, or even about the importance of particularities inside an immigration policy. Those things matter. I care about those things, obviously. But when you're communicating with the masses, that is not the way to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not the job of the elites to elevate culture. Sometimes that's an important aspect of what you're doing. And if you're a ruling elite, you should absolutely be doing that. When you're recruiting elites, you should 100%, or people who are, going to be somewhere mid-tier, you should absolutely be winnowing. You should not just be opening the gates to everybody. You should not bring in everybody who loves Hulk Hogan or some rapper or something. That's not your job. But when you are specifically having an event to speak to the masses, yeah, that's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to do. And that's okay. It's okay to speak on different levels. It's okay to have multiple strategies. It's okay to go low resolution to high resolution. These things are okay. Don't be above it. Don't be above understanding the Walmart shopper. You are not better than these people. But if you're going to be in charge of these people, you need to go ahead and understand them. That's really critically important. And a lot of people in politics don't get this. They do not understand this. And that's a huge failure on their part. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming by. It's been great talking to you. If you'd like to go ahead and get these broadcasts as podcasts, you can subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if this is your first time on the YouTube channel, of course, you should go ahead and subscribe, click the bell, the notification, everything to make sure that you can catch these streams when they go live. If you'd like to go ahead and get my new book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or go ahead and order it through your favorite local bookstore. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I'll talk to you next time.